There were some polls suggesting you're going to be annihilated and some polls suggesting you're going to be thrashed. Now, which ones do you prefer to look at? And what are you going to do about that? How do you re-gear your campaign to deal with this?
Well, most of the polls that we see that are published on a regular basis don't take into account people who haven't decided how they're going to vote. And nearly over 20% of people still haven't yet made up their mind. And a significant proportion of those are Conservative voters.
Opinion poll, an exclusive poll by the pollster YouGov, and it sets out the picture of Labour on track for the biggest election victory in history, bigger even than the landslide won by Tony Blair back in 1997. What are you thinking?
Well, we won't know actually till the results till July the 4th, and there's a long way to go in this election campaign yet. And certainly I've done a huge amount of door knocking over, recent months, to be honest, not just the last few weeks. And there is no love for Keir Starmer. So the polls, are always surprising, but we found in the local elections just a few weeks ago that actually they didn't reflect that big over 20% lead when actually people came out to vote. And what we saw was that our voters stayed at home in those local elections because they could stay at home and, lose Conservative councillors, but still have a Conservative government. So what really matters is what happens on polling day. And when I'm speaking to voters and saying to them, it's either Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer as your next Prime Minister, or Angela Rayner, who seems to be wearing the trousers in that relationship at the moment, they don't want a Labour government. So, that's the decision that people will have to make on July the 4th, who they want to be the next Prime Minister.
I mean, Maria, you're clearly right to say the opinion polls are pointing in very different directions depending on which one you look at. But this is the range of possibilities. There are some polls suggesting you're going to be annihilated and some polls suggesting you're going to be thrashed. Now, which ones do you prefer to look at? And what are you going to do about that? How do you re-gear your campaign to deal with this?
Well, most of the polls that we see that are published on a regular basis don't take into account people who haven't decided how they're going to vote. And nearly over 20% of people still haven't yet made up their mind. And a significant proportion of those are Conservative voters. And so that's what I'm seeing on the doorstep, is that people are starting to make up their mind as to who they want. And
Yes.
when I speak to them, certainly in my constituency, they're not big fans of Keir Starmer or Angela Rayner. And we'll be coming back to the Conservatives like they didn't at the local elections, because they want to make sure that they have a Conservative
Yes.
government going forward, or certainly a Conservative MP.
I mean, again, you're right to say the opinion polls take different ways of calculating what might happen on the basis of the don't knows. People who say they don't yet know which way they're going to vote. They cut them up, they dice them and slice them in different ways. But again, whichever way they do it, they still point to a big defeat for your party. And now we hear, Maria, that Nigel Farage is running for Parliament. He's going to be the leader of Reform, which, very simply, that is really, really bad news for you, isn't it?
Well, Nigel Farage and the Reform Party, we've been very clear, and we saw it in the West Midlands as a classic example where Reform stood and Andy Street lost by 0.8%, not 20 odd percent, but 0.8%. And it was, we lost a great mayor for the West Midlands who was bringing in investment and opportunities for that region. And that's what we're saying to people. There's no other party that's tried to tackle immigration over the last Parliament more than us. We've seen 25,000 people deported. We've stopped 36,000 people in the last year crossing from France. The Rwanda scheme, we've got Ireland, for example, complaining that they're getting boatloads of illegal migrants because of the Rwanda scheme. And that's what this government has been trying to do. And if people are really concerned about immigration, the answer isn't to hand the keys to number 10 to Keir Starmer, who's already done a deal with the EU for over 100,000 people to come to the UK as part of that deal.
I mean, just to be clear, because I'm sure you want to be seen as being realistic about the situation in which we all find ourselves. You're not, are you, telling me that Reform is not a big problem for your party? You're not telling me it's not going to be a bigger problem now that Nigel Farage is running for Parliament. Now he's going to be leader of Reform. And you're not telling me that some of those in our poll forecast to lose their seats. I'm looking at Jeremy Hunt. I'm looking at Grant Shapps. I'm looking at Alex Chalk. I'm looking at Johnny Mercer, Victoria Prentice, possibly Penny Morgan. You're not telling me that they're going to be sitting there saying it's all going to be okay. We can just carry on exactly as we are.
No, absolutely. We're fighting for every vote. But we also have to be clear with British people that while I completely understand people's frustrations over, things like immigration, Keir Starmer is not the answer to those problems. We know that he is keen to do a deal with the EU, which would see over 100,000 people crossing from the EU into the UK. This country has had 2 years, literally within 8 weeks of the last general election, we were in lockdown. We paid people's wages for nearly 2 years through furlough. We paid businesses significant grants to keep them afloat. We got the NHS protected during that time. We've got the vaccine rollout in place. And we've had difficult times after that to try and get our country back on track. And we are starting to do that. Our economy is turning a corner with inflation down, manufacturing up, record levels of jobs. And starting to be able to give tax cuts in the forms of the national insurance cuts. So we are starting to turn that tide. That will all be lost if Labour get into number 10.
All right, look at what you're saying now today. We got the official Tory message of the day on a new law to codify gender identity, and you're telling us that under a new law, if you get back into office, which is going to be up to the voters, it's not going to be up to any opinion poll. If you get back into office, there'll be a new law which determines sex identity as on biological lines. That is, by the way, all about core vote strategy, isn't it?
Well, this is something we've been working on for quite a long time. If you noticed that the Hillary Cass report came out a few weeks ago, which we commissioned, which looked at how we manage the gender services, particularly for children. And many of her recommendations were around the work that we've been doing on that. And we've been doing work in the NHS, for example, on making sure that single-sex spaces are protected.
Right. Okay, so if this is a thought, if you've thought this through, then there are still one or two questions in the air, and just on what you're saying today. So tell me, what would define a biological woman in those tiny minority of cases where that question arises? Who would be allowed to be excluded from, say, a rape crisis centre or a sports team? Are you saying that those gender recognition certificates won't count anymore under this law?
No, they won't. It will be on the basis of biological sex. So if you're born female, so an adult female human, then that is your biological sex, and that can't be changed. And there are many sensitive areas, and this is not about a trans issue. This is about a woman's issue. And there are many areas, whether it's healthcare, prisons, sports, that really biological sex does make a difference. And, we are taking a stand, and people may disagree with us, but we are the only party taking that stand, that biological sex matters, and the law of the land should reflect that.
Yeah, but we are, of course, talking about, a small number of people, but small number of people and their rights and their lives, they matter, don't they? I mean, some people do cross over, transition to another sex. They have gender reassignment operations, and when that happens, it changes a birth certificate. What about the rights of those people? How are they affected?
No, absolutely. And that is covered under the Equality Act as it stands now. And absolutely, it's a sensitive area. But there are some parts of life, and healthcare is a significant one of those, that if you are biologically female, that having single-sex space for female conditions, so if you're going for gynae procedures, if you're giving birth, for example, you do need those female-only areas. You have the right to be able to ask for someone of your same biological sex to do an intimate examination. I don't think that's extreme politics. I think that's looking after women's rights. And you can do that in a very sensitive way as well. And it's not to be dismissive of people who've gone through transitioning.